Before I was a grandfather sitting in this quiet house in Sudbury, I spent 22 years as a staff sergeant with the Canadian Forces. I know how to assess a situation. I know how to act under pressure. And I know when someone is lying to my face. My son is 34 years old. His name is Derek. He married his wife, Pauline, 7 years ago, and I was proud at that wedding. I stood there in my good jacket and I thought, this is a good woman. She has a daughter, Lily, from a previous relationship. A quiet, careful little girl who used to trace the patterns on my kitchen tablecloth with her finger while we talked. When Derek and Pauline adopted her officially, 2 years into the marriage, I cried. I am not embarrassed to say that. I cried. Then they had Owen. I don't say that to cast blame on the boy. Owen is 8 years old and he didn't choose any of this. But things changed when Owen arrived. Slowly at first, the way a crack runs through ice, you don't see it until you're already standing on the wrong side of it. Lily started sitting differently at the dinner table. Smaller. She stopped reaching for things without asking first. At Christmas 2 years ago, I watched Pauline hand Owen 3 wrapped boxes and hand Lily 1. I told myself it was coincidence. I am a man who spent 2 decades not wanting to believe the worst of people because, in my experience, assuming the worst creates enemies out of strangers. So I watched. I waited. I told myself I was imagining it. I wish I had trusted my instincts sooner. It was a Wednesday night in March when my phone rang at 1:37 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on my nightstand and thought, someone is dead or someone is in trouble. There is no other reason a phone rings at that hour. It was Lily. She wasn't crying, exactly. It was something worse than crying. It was that flat, hollow voice a child uses when they've already been crying for so long they've gone past it. She said, "Grandpa, are you awake?" I said. "I'm awake, sweetheart. I'm right here." She said, "I'm really thirsty and I can't get into the kitchen." I sat up. "What do you mean you can't get into the kitchen?" A pause. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, Mom put a lock on the fridge before they left, and the pantry door has a latch on it now, the high kind. I can't reach it. I said, "Lily, where are your parents?" Another pause. "They went on a trip with Owen." "When did they leave?" "Sunday." It was Wednesday night. She had been alone in that house for 3.5 days. I was already out of bed. I was already looking for my keys. I want to be precise about what I found when I got to their house in Hanmer, because precision matters. Pauline's sister lived 40 minutes away. I found out later she had been called to check in once a day, but hadn't shown up yet that week because of a stomach bug. So Lily had been completely alone for going on 4 days. The house was cold. Not dangerously cold, but that specific February in Ontario cold that gets into the walls when nobody'd been running the heat properly. Lily met me at the door in her socks and her school hoodie, and she looked at me the way you look at someone when you stop believing they were actually coming. The fridge had a combination lock on the handle, the kind you'd put on a storage unit. There was a child latch at the top of the pantry door, well above where Lily could reach. On the counter there was a loaf of white bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a case of juice boxes. That was it. That was what they'd left for her. 10 juice boxes and a loaf of bread. For what was supposed to be 11 days. I stood in that kitchen for a moment and I didn't say anything. There are times when you have to hold your reaction somewhere quiet inside yourself, because if you let it out in front of a child, you will frighten him. Lily was watching me, so I took a breath and I opened the bread and I made her a sandwich and I found some crackers in her backpack from school and I sat across from her at that cold kitchen table while she ate. She told me they had left on Sunday morning. Derek had said they were going on a special trip. He called it a family adventure. She had asked if she was coming, and Pauline had said this trip was for people who were turning 8 soon, and Owen's birthday was in April. She said Lily would get her own special trip. Lily told me she'd asked what trip, and Pauline had said she'd think of something. She told me this without bitterness. That was the part that got me. She had already learned not to expect things. I did not call the police that night. I want to be honest about why. I was still their grandfather. Derek was still my son, and part of me, the stubborn, hoping part, wanted to give him the chance to explain himself before I burned down anything that couldn't be rebuilt. I took Lily home with me that night, and I made up the spare room, and I sat in my armchair until about 4 in the morning, just thinking. I have a neighbor, Martin, who retired from the OPP after 30 years. We've had coffee on my porch every Saturday morning for 11 years. I called him at 7 a.m. and asked him to come over. I didn't explain why. He came. I told him what I'd found. I showed him the photo I'd taken of the fridge, the lock, the counter with the bread and peanut butter, the empty juice box Lily had left beside the sink. Martin didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Lawrence, you know what you have to do." I did know. I called my daughter-in-law's sister. She answered on the third ring. Already apologetic, she started explaining about her stomach flu, the timing, she was going to go that afternoon. And I told her not to worry, that Lily was safe at my house. There was a silence on her end that told me she understood in some way the shape of what had happened. Then I asked her where Derek and Pauline had gone. She hesitated. "Lawrence, I don't want to be in the middle of this." I said, "You're already in the middle of it. You were the safety net and you weren't there. I'm not angry at you, but I need to know where my son is." She told me. They had booked a 12-day ski trip to Whistler, British Columbia, Derek, Pauline, and Owen. Flights out of Sudbury Regional, connection through Toronto. They were staying at a resort in the Whistler Village. She told me the name of it because, I think, she needed to tell someone, and she had nowhere else to put it. I wrote the name down on the notepad I keep by the phone. Here is where those 22 years started to matter. I did not fly to Whistler in a panic. I didn't call Derek screaming from my kitchen. That is not how you win anything. I spent 2 days doing what needed to be done. I called a family lawyer in Sudbury, a woman named Frances, who had been recommended to me years ago, and whose card I'd kept in my desk drawer without knowing why. I told her the situation. She told me what documentation I needed and what steps I should take before Derek and Pauline returned. Martin came back the second day and walked through the house with me, and we took a proper photographic record. The fridge lock, the pantry latch, the single outlet that had been turned off at the breaker, the one that controlled the light in Lily's bedroom. I hadn't noticed that the first night. Lily had been sleeping with a flashlight. I filed a report with Children's Aid Society that afternoon. I want to say that clearly. I filed that report. My son, my own blood, and I filed the report against him. Because the alternative was to be the kind of man who looks at a child sleeping with a flashlight in a cold house on a bread and juice box diet and decides that family loyalty is more important. I am not that man. I was not raised to be that man, and I did not raise Derek to do what he did. I also called the resort in Whistler. I was polite. I said I was calling about a guest named Derek. I gave the last name and that I was his father and there was a family emergency involving a child. The woman at the front desk was professional and said she couldn't confirm guest information over the phone, but if I had an emergency, I could contact local RCMP who could reach the guest directly. That's exactly what I did. I did not go to Whistler myself. That's an important detail because you might expect me to. But I had Lily, and Lily needed to stay in school, needed her routine, needed something in her life that was still consistent. Uprooting her to drag her across the country while I confronted her parents was not a plan, it was a reaction. I had spent enough years managing logistics to know the difference. I gave the RCMP detachment near Whistler the full picture. Martin helped me frame it correctly. They made contact with Derek at the resort. I don't know exactly what was said in that conversation, but I know the result, Derek called me that evening. He called from outside, by the sound of it. Wind in the background, the kind of muffled outdoor quiet you get when there's snow around you. He said, "Dad, she was fine. Stacy was checking on her." Stacy didn't check on her once, Derek. Not once in 4 days. We didn't know that. You left a 10-year-old child alone in a house in February with a lock on the refrigerator. You left her a loaf of bread. Do you hear yourself? There was a long silence. Then, we didn't lock the fridge so she'd go hungry. We locked it so she wouldn't eat everything in the first 2 days and have nothing left. I thought about Lily sitting at that kitchen table, tracing the tablecloth with her finger. I thought about how she had said, "Please, can I have more?" before she'd even finished asking the question, like she'd been trained to brace for no. I said, "Come home. We have 4 more days. Come home, Derek. He came home in 2 days, not 4. Pauline did not speak to me when they arrived. She walked past me into the house with Owen on her hip like I wasn't standing there. Derek stood on the porch, and we looked at each other, and I saw something in his face that I recognized, and it was worse than anger. It was embarrassment. He was embarrassed, not sorry. The Cass investigation was already open when they got home. A caseworker had come to my house to speak with Lily, and I had sat in the other room the whole time, close enough that she could hear me if she needed to, far enough that she felt free to speak. I don't know everything Lily said in that room. But when the caseworker came out, she spent a long time writing in her notes before she said anything to me. What came out over the next few weeks was worse than I had let myself consider. Lily told the caseworker that this wasn't the first time she'd been left behind. The previous summer, Derek and Pauline had taken Owen to a week-long baseball camp in Barrie, and Lily had stayed home with Pauline's sister. But she'd told Lily beforehand that she was only there to check in, not to actually look after her. Lily was 9. She had made her own meals for a week. There was a school incident that year that her teacher had flagged. Lily coming in repeatedly with the same lunch, just crackers and a single piece of cheese, saying she was fine, she wasn't hungry, not to worry. The teacher had made a note. The note had not gone anywhere. It started going somewhere now. Francis, my lawyer, helped me file for emergency temporary custody. Given the Cass involvement and the documented evidence, the photographs, the police contact and Whistler, the school records, Lily's own account, the application was taken seriously. We had a hearing within 3 weeks. I sat in that courtroom and I did not look at Derek. I looked at the documents in front of me and I answered every question I was asked as precisely as I could. Pauline's lawyer tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, as a lapse in communication with the sister-in-law, as a well-intentioned plan that had an unforeseen gap. Frances was very good. She didn't raise her voice once. The judge awarded me temporary custody of Lily pending the full Cass assessment. Derek didn't look at me when it was read out. Pauline put her hand over her mouth. I looked at the far wall and breathed slowly. The way they teach you to. The way you have to when you've just done something that cost more than you knew you had to spend. Lily has been with me for 4 months now. She sleeps in the spare room with the door open because she said closed doors make her nervous, so we leave it open. She started eating properly within about 2 weeks. I make a real breakfast every morning, eggs or oatmeal, and she has started actually sitting at the table instead of eating standing up, which she did the first few days like she was ready to leave at any moment. She joined a recreational skating program through the city, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She's not particularly skilled yet, but she doesn't care. And watching her not care is one of the best things I have seen in years. Derek and I have spoken 3 times since the hearing. They are not easy conversations. He has told me I overreacted. He has told me that Lily was never in danger, that children are more resilient than I think, that I've damaged his family over something that could have been handled privately. I have listened to all of it. I am his father, and I will always listen. But there is a difference between listening and agreeing, and there is a difference between a family handling something privately and a child going to sleep alone in a cold house, in the dark, because someone turned off her bedroom breaker before they left for a ski resort. Owen comes to see Lily on Saturday afternoons. I suggested it, and Derek agreed, I think, because it was easier to agree than to refuse. Owen is a sweet kid. He doesn't fully understand what happened. He and Lily play in the yard, and sometimes I watch them from the kitchen window while I'm doing the dishes, and I think about how none of this was their fault, not either of them. The full Cass assessment is still ongoing. Francis has told me the permanent custody hearing will likely be in the autumn. I'm 67 years old, and I'm relearning how to time a school morning routine and how to pack a lunch that a 10-year-old will actually eat. Last week, Lily asked me if we could get a fish, and I said yes, and we spent a Saturday afternoon at the pet store in the new Sudbury Center, choosing a single bed of fish that she named Captain. Captain lives on the kitchen counter now, near the window, in a small tank with a blue plant. Every morning, Lily gives him 4 pellets and taps the glass gently and says good morning. There are things I wish I had done sooner. I wish I had paid more attention 2 years ago when I noticed the shift at Christmas. I wish I had asked Lily directly, in a quiet moment, whether she was okay, instead of waiting for her to call me at 1:47 in the morning from a cold house. I carry that. I expect I will carry it for some time. But she is here now. She is eating breakfast. She is sleeping with the door open and the hall light on. And every morning when I hear her talking to that fish, I think, this is what I was supposed to do. Not fly across the country, not make dramatic scenes, just show up when it mattered and stay. That is the only thing I know how to do. That is what I did. I keep thinking about that loaf of bread on the counter. Not the fridge lock, not the turned-off breaker, not even the phone call at 1:47 in the morning. Though all of those things live in me too. It's the bread that stays, a single loaf of white bread and a jar of peanut butter, set out for a child like she was something that just needed to be kept alive rather than loved. That image tells you everything about how Lily had come to be seen in that house. Not a daughter, not even a guest, something to be managed before the real family left for the airport. I've thought a lot about how things reach that point. People don't wake up one morning and decide to treat a child that way. It happens in small steps, each one so incremental that you can convince yourself it's nothing one less gift under the tree, one trip she wasn't included in, one door locked a little higher than she could reach. Derek didn't see a monster in the mirror because he never did one monstrous thing. He did 30 quiet things. And by the time I was standing in that cold kitchen, 30 quiet things had added up to abandonment. That's the part I sit with. Because I was there for some of those 30 quiet things, and I told myself I was imagining it. That's not something I can give back to Lily. I can only carry it honestly and try not to repeat it. What I've come to understand is that doing right by a child, or by anyone who depends on you, isn't about grand gestures. It's about the daily choice to pay attention, to notice when something is off, and ask the question instead of talking yourself out of it. I spent 2 years convincing myself that what I was seeing wasn't what I was seeing, because the truth was too uncomfortable and the relationship too important. That's not wisdom. That's cowardice dressed up as patience. The morning after I brought Lily home, I sat across from her while she ate, and I watched her flinch slightly when I reached for the butter. Just a small, automatic flinch, like she was bracing for something to be taken away. She didn't even notice she'd done it. I noticed. And I thought, this is what happens when a child's intelligence gets used entirely for survival. She had become so sharp at reading danger, so careful, so contained. All that careful, quiet intelligence pointed inward, toward protection, instead of outward, toward possibility. That's what breaks my heart more than anything else. Not what was done to her, but what she had to become in order to endure it. She's different now. 4 months is not a long time, but she reaches for things without asking first. Last Saturday, she disagreed with me about something. I can't even remember what. Something about which route to take to the arena. And she just said it, flatly, without the half-second pause she used to have before any opinion. That pause used to be her checking whether it was safe to speak. It's getting shorter. I don't take that lightly. I'm 67 years old. I did not plan to be raising a child at this point in my life. Some mornings, I am tired in ways I don't have words for, but I also know that the things that ask the most of us are usually the things that matter the most, and that there is no version of being a decent person that lets you walk past a child sleeping in the dark with a flashlight and call it someone else's problem. What happened to Lily happened because the adults around her chose comfort over honesty, over and over again, until the choices accumulated into something no one could pretend away anymore. What happens next depends on whether she has people around her who are willing to be honest even when it costs something. I intend to be one of those people. That is the only plan I have. It turns out to be enough.